You are listening to the Billy Dees Podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, my name is Billy Dees, and we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. Today, we have an interview for you. And on the studio line, we have Laura Buchwald. Laura, so glad you are here.
So glad to be here, Billy. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Laura is an author. She's written a book. And, we're coming off the holidays. And that can be a tough time for anyone. A lot of times, especially as we get older, loved ones pass away. And it's not just holidays, but different anniversaries. If you had a special day, like on the 4th of July, that you always went fishing with your father or whatever, and then all of a sudden that person is no longer there, it can be very difficult. And we remember loved ones during those times, very acutely, ones who have passed. And what Laura is kind of saying, in essence, is what if you could have just one more meal with them? That was the longing for podcast host and author, our guest today, Laura Buchwald, in her new book, The Book of Reservations. And it's been said that Laura brings to life a lovable, eclectic cast of characters and a protagonist, it's easy for me to say, a protagonist who can talk to the dead. So let's start there, Laura. Just a little bit about you. Where are you from? Where do you hail from, as they say?
I hail from New York City, and I live here currently. I've done stints elsewhere, but I'm in Manhattan, in Chelsea.
Oh, okay. Anything interesting going on in New York these days?
Oh, yeah, a couple of things. I don't know. Yeah. I keep seeing these headlines come across my feed, but yeah.
That's fine. Did you always aspire to the arts, writing, movies? Is that something that's always been in your blood?
Absolutely. I've always been a writer since I could first hold a writing implement. And didn't necessarily aspire to write novels until the predecessor to the Book of Reservations. But I've always I've always gravitated toward the arts and media, and have dabbled in all kinds of writing, from screenplays to plays to self-indulgent poetry to short stories and now novels.
Yes. The premise of the question that you have, what if you could have just one more meal with, your loved one? Is this an idea? Is this something that you have felt throughout your life and felt that, is this what inspired you to write the book?
I was inspired. Well, I'll get to what inspired me to write the book, but that concept has been with me for quite some time. Okay. I really want to believe, and so I do, that death is not the end, and that our loved ones are still around us in some form. And it was actually on a trip to New Orleans that I visited a restaurant that had a ghost table. My book is part of the Ghost Table trilogy. So the idea is that my protagonist sets a table every night for her departed loved ones. I just loved that idea of welcoming our departed loved ones back into our world however we could. And, I've thought a lot about grief over the years. I've grieved a lot over the years. And just this notion of being able to connect again, one final time, but I don't like finals. So just being able to connect again is part of my motivation for writing this series.
You mentioned your beliefs. When you're writing something, how do you remain objective about, and it's pretty near impossible for Einstein struggled with it. Okay. So if someone like that can struggle with it, any of us can, but how do you sometimes try to stay objective with what's possible in a story or what may be possible in our own lives with what you want to be true? We all would like to meet, a loved one again. Is there ever a conflict there?
There is. I actually built a conflict into the Book of Reservations in that my protagonist is very much a believer and has this ability to communicate with spirit. Her partner is stubbornly pragmatic and rational and does not believe in or care to indulge in any of that. So I got to sort of exercise that contrast. So I was able to think about my beliefs and my hopes, and also think about, of course, I have people in my life who are skeptics or who are just disbelievers.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to sort of dive into both lines of thought, and it was interesting.
Yeah.
And, I really got to explore. I got to explore my beliefs and also explore from the other side, why people would be so skeptical or so belittling of these beliefs.
Yeah.
And I do understand it entirely.
Yeah, the word skeptic, at least as it relates to how I view it, is it gets a bad rap because I think there's a lot of good evidence for an afterlife, although we can't draw a conclusive line scientifically, but so far. I've interviewed, for example, a lot of hospice nurses, one in particular who was a skeptic and a disbeliever before she was a nurse before, but when she started working in hospice, it turned her around. She now believes that there is something afterwards because there seems to be such a consistency in how people have a tendency to transition during that time. And she's had so many cases where, a lot of times people say, well, it's the drugs, it's the pain medication. But they were perfectly lucid. Otherwise, they knew where they were. They knew what time of day it was. They knew the people that were actually in the room. Perfectly lucid, but at the same time aware of something else that was in the room. And she said, it really spooks you. It really, because you believe them at that point. It is so convincing. Have you heard stories like that? Yeah.
I have absolutely heard stories like that. And, for the same pain medications to affect so many people in the exact same way is fairly apocryphal. So, I love that idea. I've been in hospice situations with people and seen them react to forces that we couldn't see. And I love that idea that as they're nearing their transition, their departed loved ones come through to welcome them and to help them make that transition. I just got chills. I think that's a really beautiful notion. And I'd be so interested to hear more from this hospice nurse about her experiences, but I know people who've worked as hospice nurses who've had fairly profound experiences as well. So I think there is something to that. And I love that you're not a skeptic.
Yeah. Well, in the classic sense, no. Here again, I'll reference Einstein once again. He said, "Never dismiss anything. It's a path to being wrong." Eventually, never dismiss anything. Grief is a tough emotion, and I've heard a lot of people talk about it in different ways. I think probably one of the biggest fallacies that I hear is, time heals all wounds, and sometimes it doesn't. It may get to the point where you have it under control, and you move on with your life. But there's always going to be a certain longing with some individuals, depending on who the person was and how they died.
Sure.
Can you talk about grief a little bit as you understand it?
Yeah. I mean, I find grief is such a mercurial process. It's something that is so individual and yet so universal. And when we experience it, we're somehow anchored more completely to this world and to the people around us. It's, no matter what your background, who you are, of course, religious backgrounds have different ways of processing or understanding death and grief. But it's something that we all experience. It's something that I think pretty much every warm-blooded mammal experiences. And it's fascinating. I lost my father last summer, and, to take a step back and kind of watch the grieving process can be really fascinating. I was so struck at the time that one of the predominant feelings that was coming up for me was gratitude, which, sounds very, we talk a lot about gratitude these days, but it was really profound just how grateful. And that you talk about, a lot of it has to do with how people passed. My father was in his late 80s and lived a beautiful life and died a peaceful death on his own terms, at home. And so there was comfort in that and just gratitude for, it was a pure grief versus the wild, messy grief that can come up when we have complex feelings about the person, when the circumstances are wild and messy. So every single time we lose somebody, it's an entirely different experience, and it's also cumulative. So we're grieving that person and we're grieving all the losses that came before. Because you're right, time certainly makes things more comfortable and more bearable, but that loss is always going to be there.
Yes, absolutely. In terms of utilizing grief as an author, there's a lot of ways you could use it as a motivation. And there's some who say that it's very therapeutic to write a book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, that is about grief or death or something along those lines. How did that work for you?
It worked, well, a couple ways. I was in the middle of writing the Book of Reservations when my father passed. I actually got to finish a draft. He got to know that I finished a draft of it, which is great comfort to me. He got to know that my first book was being published. And when he passed, and I said to a friend who's a novelist, how the hell am I going to do this now? How am I going to throw myself into this work that's so much about love and loss? And she said, just use it. And I did. And at the same time, when I've written about it in the first book, I've been able to really articulate some of the experiences that I've had with grief. I talk about how those stages are not stages at all because they don't come in any kind of order. They come, they come when they want to come, and not always when it's convenient and not always when it makes sense on paper. So I've gotten to really examine my experiences in writing about grief and writing about my characters going through the process.
Yes. That's something that I've heard a lot. This writing process, it's in with trauma writers too. They have this relationship with it that's, kind of a double-edged sword. It's kind of a good thing, but it also doesn't feel so good sometimes. So that's an interesting part of writing. Speaking of writing, we this program, I think readers in general really kind of are interested in the writing process. Sometimes it gives them an insight into the book that they may want to read. What advice would you have for aspiring writers? And I'll dovetail that into today's world. It used to be 30, 40 years ago, it was very difficult to get something published.
Yes.
And now things are a little different. You have a lot more options, but that's also here again. The bad side to that, it's just like with digital media. It's very relatively easy to break into the business, but the part of the problem is it's easy for everybody. So you have a lot of voices out there. It takes a long time to rise above it. Same with publishing. So let's start with writing. And if you want to get your work out there, what do you think is the best path?
Oh, okay. Those are two different questions in my mind, because getting your work out there, you have to, I think you have to write because you love writing.
Yes.
Not with the idea of it being a pathway to publication. Certainly not with the idea of it being a revenue stream, because it, for most of us, will not be. And I've worked with a lot of young writers. I've mentored some young, recent graduates from my alma mater, one of whom wanted to get into writing because he wanted to supplement his income. And I had to gently break the news that was unlikely. But if you love writing, then write, and don't be afraid of the terribly messy first draft. That's an integral part of the process. You have to get it out there so that you have something to sculpt into something beautiful. It's true, and it's cliche, but writing is all about revisions. Revisions are your friend, and that's when the magic happens first, when you just throw your energy into getting something down on the proverbial page, and then when you get to really shape it, that's another kind of alchemy. To get your work out there, nowadays, self-publishing or independent publishing is a much more viable option than it once was. It's not, it's respected. I've heard that, there are a lot of these Instagram and TikTok book influencers that much prefer to discover a self-published writer and to publicize them than somebody who the publishing houses are telling them to pay attention to. So if your goal is to really get your work out there, for one thing, there are so many publishers now, so many small independent presses that are, I'm with one and they're fabulous. And, it's not all about the big five publishing houses. So being patient, it's a long game. For fiction, in almost always you have to go through an agent in order to get traditionally published. And you're not going to get an agent your first time out of the gate writing to a potential agent or prospective agent. You have to be prepared to put in the time and effort to really research. And, I think I submitted to dozens of agents before mine came through. And one of my writing mentors had told me to be prepared to submit to 50 or 60 agents, which at the time felt so daunting, and was, because every agent wants something slightly different. Yeah. It's not a one size fits all and just replace the name. But if you have the patience, then, there will be somebody who loves your work, and it may not be it may not be the publisher that of your dreams. May very well be a publisher you've never heard of, but there are some small publishers doing beautiful, beautiful work, and who really care about their authors and give their authors more creative control than some of the bigger houses might. So I think understanding the ever-changing industry is great. And then I've worked with several memoir writers who just really needed to get their stories out there. And so for them, self-publishing became a much more attractive option because they were guaranteed publication, of course. They have complete creative control and ownership of their product. And, I guess it was a catharsis to get your memoir out there if you feel you really need to do it. And it can be the same for fiction, of course. But sure. I was patient. I queried many, 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 many agents. And when I finally did get my agent, we went through so many rounds of submissions, and she kept promising me we'd find a home. Rejection is, and I don't even like the word rejection, but you're going to get a lot of, it only takes one door to open. And so having the patience to persevere through all of those doors that remain closed is really helpful.
Sure. I think your advice is very correct in having a love for it. Or it's something that you, in your body creatively, that you have to exercise. Here again, I tell people who get into digital media the same thing. If you love talking to people, if you love hearing their stories, or if you're passionate about a certain subject and you want to do content about outer space or whatever, make sure that is what carries you. And worry about where to go with it after you get a little established and it starts to grow some legs. And then you can make a better decision in terms of, is this something that I want to try to monetize? Right. The creative juice flow, as it were, has to be there. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say that what you said about, if it's a topic that you love, also advice for writers is to write what you love and what you want to read. If you try to meet what you think are the market's demands, or, what you think is, or perhaps what is selling really well in fiction nowadays, if it's not a milieu that makes sense for you to be writing in, it's going to come across. If you love what you're writing, that's going to come across too.
Yeah. I'll ask you this. I said I wasn't going to send you any curveballs, and this is kind of a curveball, but it's not a bad one. It's not a bad one.
Okay.
Actually, it's very relevant to writing these days. I get asked a lot. For example, I do media production, and a lot of people ask me what the role of AI has been. And quite frankly, I think in the parts that are creative, when I'm working with a client and I'm outside with them creating content, asking them questions and putting something together, I'm going to say minimal. But where it has changed for people who work in the industry more as full-time editors and everything is a lot of the busy work. When the taking out the fluff, the bad takes, fixing the bad color, all that stuff can be done by AI now. And then it's good in the sense that the creator can concentrate on the parts that really make a difference.
Sure.
But it has narrowed the field in terms of billable hours and as many people that can work in it. And I would venture to say that that's similar for writing. Have you seen an impact?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, my early freelance jobs were all the busy work that is now being replaced by AI. One of my first freelancing jobs was with Simon & Schuster. I was reading manuscripts and writing coverage. They don't need a human being to do that nowadays to get the gist of a story. Yeah. And I'm not saying Simon & Schuster uses AI. I don't know, but I know some of the agencies and production companies use it to read scripts and get, do breakdowns of characters and plot summaries, certainly. So that was, I was paid to do that 100 years ago, but I was paid to do that. And also I'm an editor and a copy editor and a proofreader. That's all stuff that's being done by AI, though I would caution to always, if you're using it in that way, double check and put a human stamp on everything. I hate the idea of it being used to generate creative content, as I think any creator should and would hate that idea. I do use it for research purposes. Mm-hmm. My books are set in, the first one's 99, second one is 2000. The one I'm writing now is 2003. So if I want to know what, an overview of what personal technology was like in 2003, it's easier to ask AI. I still verify everything that comes my way because, I've seen absolutely wrong answers come through AI before, which is sort of a relief in a way that we still do need a human being. I know it's getting smarter, but
yeah. Well, I think that's a great answer. I think that you have to have your touch on everything, and that's part of a writing discipline. And I know that that's something that you talk about. I have a friend who's a humor writer. Her name's Dorothy, and I asked her one time, "What do you do about writer's block?" And she said that writer's block is a convenience that amateurs have.
I love that.
Yeah, she said that if her post is due, she's got to come up with something, and that's it. So you sit down and write it. I know you've said something similar in some of your show notes here. I wanted to ask you about the writing of discipline and research and everything. All is part of that. There's no easy way, even with AI, to just produce something great. Right? You have to be disciplined at it.
You have to be disciplined. You have to, right now I'm writing my way through a very messy first draft of the third book in this trilogy. Well, I'm actually first and a half draft because I've done some revision. And you have to give yourself permission to do that. I don't have as tight a deadline as your friend Des on her work, I'm sure. I have a sort of a vague deadline, but one that I really want to meet. This is now my third time doing this with this series, and I need to remind myself that, books 1 and 2 were super messy at one point as well. And you have to just write through that. I love your friends, not really believing in writer's block. That's comforting for me because I don't know that what I have is writer's block as much as it is fear of the imperfection that is on the page. And, I have to take my own advice and not fear that imperfection and know that I have to keep generating in order to have something to shape into, what will be a much tighter final product.
Sure. I've had writers tell me, and I don't know, I'm sure it varies, is setting a schedule for writing. Like, say, for example, noon to 3 o'clock every day. I've got to write. That's when I write, and I can't get, I can't have other plans. And if I'm not particularly inspired in some way on a particular day, I still have to write. Does that work for you? Or do you just, are you one of those people who wakes up at 1 o'clock in the morning and say, I got this great idea, and you have to go write it?
No, I'm somebody who will occasionally wake up at 1 with an idea that I'll messily write down in a notebook next to my bed. But with the way my schedule is these days, I can't really commit to, 9 to 12 every day. But what I can commit to is a word count. And it's not every day, because there are some days, like today, I had meetings throughout the day. I need more than just an hour here to get any real writing done. But what I did for the Book of Reservations was, because I was on such a tight deadline, was I went for word count. I went for 1,500 words a day. Some days I greatly surpassed that. Other days I fell short, and I got it done. So that's, I've spoken with writers, some who do the schedule, some who do the word count, and some who only write when they're inspired, which treating this as my full-time job, I can't only write when I'm inspired. I have to create the inspiration. I will look at my week and see, okay, Wednesday I have this huge chunk of time. That's going to be my writing time, and I'll write it into my calendar, but I can't do a consistent everyday schedule.
Sure. Speaking of inspiration, how's this for a segue? Yes. Speaking of inspiration, they're in New York. I mean, obviously there's a lot of, Statue of Liberty and, Empire State Building and all this other stuff, a lot of historical places. And you talk about the restaurant culture in New York. And everybody thinks of New York steak, New York pizza, this, that, and the other thing. Mm-hmm. When you talk about the restaurant culture of New York, what exactly is that?
Well, so the restaurant that inspired this series was a very neighborhood, not necessarily a destination, but a very comfortable neighborhood place. And I love those places where you can walk in any night and know half the clientele and you know all of the people who work there. That was the very first impetus for the first book, was getting to know the staff at my local place where I would go. I would meet friends. I could go alone and sit at the bar and eat dinner. I could, meet blind dates there. I could have celebrations there. It was my spot. And I really got to know the staff and the way they operated as a family, as a dysfunctional at times family. So I love the New York City neighborhood places. I love that we can pretty much get any cuisine under the sun here. Mm-hmm. So the restaurant in the Book of Reservations is a New Orleans themed restaurant. I love New Orleans food, and I love New Orleans, and sure. I love their restaurant world as well. The tie into the spirit world is that, they say that restaurants are one of the places that can attract a lot of spirit energy, because on any given night you have the gamut of human emotion and human experience, under one roof. And it's emotional energy that allegedly attracts spirits. So there's that. And like you said, there's so much rich history in New York, so many very old buildings that have seen, so many iterations of restaurants or speakeasy back in the day, or, banquet halls. And that's what the place that this was based on actually had been, all of those things. And I just think we have, and I know a lot of them have shut their doors in recent years and will continue to, but we still have some really great old school places that I so greatly appreciate. Whenever I travel, that's what I'm drawn to, is the old school classic places in any city or town versus, the up and coming brand new Michelin starred, places that are making a splash. I appreciate those as well.
Sure.
I like old school. Well,
you make an interesting point. I took an interstate trip last summer. We drove from Ohio down to Georgia. It's been a while since I drove that long interstate. From the last time that I traveled, what I noticed was everything was the same. It was the same restaurants, and even like the attorneys that have all the, if you have an accident, the names changed, but the style of the billboards, the style of the ad, everything was the same. It's all it's almost like there's this agency that is running certain parts of what you see in the world now, and the local places that used to give culture. Traveling, like you said, New Orleans and places like that, they seem to be kind of getting squeezed out. And I think that's kind of sad for our society that's happening.
It's very sad. They're the places that give a place flavor, that give a town flavor, and the places that endure over decades, that's it's like a time capsule, and it's sort of telling the story of a town or a city.
Yes.
So I hate that they're being, and it's happening here too, franchises and chains are everywhere. I mean, this charming little part of the village where there is still a couple of old school restaurants there, but there's now a P.F. Chang's right on this block. And there's, these big national chains that to me look so out of place among these historically landmarked buildings and, restaurants that have been there for decades and decades. I like local flavor and I like history, and I hope that newer, younger generations can also develop a taste for these things so that we don't just squeeze out all of the traditional.
Absolutely. I'm from Canton, Ohio, and we're famous for the Professional Football Hall of Fame. And when I was out in the restaurant community over the last year, I noticed that a lot of the old places that were like, family-owned businesses, they had all the pictures on the wall of all the famous football players that came in and ate there. And there was this history, and those types of individuals are starting to die off now.
Yes.
And you don't have that rich history in local communities anymore, and that's a shame. This is the part of the interview where I'll spare you from something cliche, like what do you think the readers are going to take away from the book? That's okay. Too cliche, but you kind of handed me one, so I'll send it your way. We are talking, first of all, to Laura Buchwald. The name of the book, The Book of Reservations. And the book, I'm told, is a cross between Ghosts and the Bear. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a great quote from the writer Carleen O'Connor, who wrote a blurb for my book. So The Bear, because it's set in a restaurant and it's about the pressures of running a restaurant in a city, in New York City. Well, really, pressures of running a restaurant anywhere. It's about I said before, the dysfunctional family, the people who everybody has their individual roles and they also really function as a team, but there are so many different personality conflicts and egos. So that's the bear element. And then ghosts, there are ghosts in my book. It's not a ghost story. They're just a fact of the world that my protagonist lives in. I don't know if you've ever seen that sitcom Ghosts. I've seen a couple of episodes of it, and the ghosts are just characters with full backstories. And, there's not are they or aren't they there? Do they or do they not exist? There's one character who absolutely communicates with them and one who cannot. And that's sort of the way it's set up in my book as well, where ghosts are just they're just part of the story.
Yes. Interesting. Talking again to Laura Buchwald, the name of the Book of Reservations. Where can people find out more about you, and where can they buy the book?
Sure. So they can find out more about me on my website, which is laurabuchwald.com. It's BUCHWALD.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. And my favorite online retailer for buying books is bookshop.org, which donates a percentage of all sales to independent bookstores, either ones that you select or ones that they'll select for you if you don't have one. So that's where I encourage people who are going to buy it online. It takes maybe 2 days longer than Amazon, and it's just a really excellent cause. You can also go into your local bookstore and ask them to order it for you, and they'll be able to do that. Your local library should be able to order it for you as well, though I should be promoting the sales part of it, not the library part, but I love libraries. So any of those places, and of course, Amazon.
Sure. Well, Laura, very insightful conversation, especially about the writing and everything. Thank you so much. I wish you nothing but the best with the book, and do stay in touch. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Oh, great to hear. My name is Billy Dees. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast pretty much anywhere online in terms of podcast platforms. We are on all of them, large and small. We've got about over a 10-year history now with the show in its current form. So very easy to find. As far as social media goes, I got to say, I know it's gone through a lot of changes, but X, which is the former Twitter, in terms of breaking news, trending topics, so real-time stuff, which ties into podcasting so well, it still works very well for me. So that's kind of like my social media home. You can find me there at Billy Dees. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. Thank you. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.